Did you know that the words politicians use today can actually rewire your brain and change how you see your fellow Americans? In this video, I'll reveal the disturbing science behind how political language is fracturing our society. I'll show you shocking research data that proves how divisive rhetoric is creating two separate Americas that can no longer communicate with each other. I'll break down 3 warning signs that indicate when political language has crossed from healthy debate into dangerous territory. But first, let me share real examples of how everyday Americans have seen friendships, families, and communities torn apart by the words our leaders choose to use. The identity distortion effect. Have you noticed how political language no longer describes policies, but instead attacks identities? When leaders use language that questions someone's fundamental identity, their religion, ethnicity, or patriotism, they're not engaging in policy debate, they're triggering a primal threat response in the brain. What cognitive scientists have discovered is genuinely alarming. When political figures attack identities rather than ideas, they activate the amygdala, the brain's fear center, creating an immediate fight or flight response. This neurological reaction makes reasonable discussion nearly impossible. Voters don't hear policy disagreements anymore, they hear existential threats. The most troubling research shows that exposure to identity-based political attacks increases cortisol, the stress hormone, by up to 37% in listeners. These aren't just offensive comments. They're physiological assaults on your nervous system. Each exposure makes you more susceptible to believing similar rhetoric in the future, creating a dangerous cycle where extreme language becomes normalized. What media commentators won't acknowledge is that this language transformation happened deliberately. Political strategists discovered that identity-based messaging drives stronger emotional responses, and stronger emotions drive voter turnout and donations. They've essentially weaponized language against voters' own neurological vulnerabilities. The empathy collapse. Did you realize that the words politicians use can actually disable your ability to empathize with fellow citizens? The empathy collapse isn't just a cultural phenomenon, it's a measurable neurological effect. One study tracked brain activity when participants heard dehumanizing language about political opponents. The results were chilling. Areas of the brain associated with empathy showed significantly decreased activity. In essence, dehumanizing political language temporarily disables the brain's capacity to recognize others' humanity. A community organizer in Michigan witnessed this firsthand when a neighborhood that had worked together for decades suddenly fractured during a local election. People who had been friends for 30 years suddenly couldn't see each other as human beings, just as enemies, she explained. The language from national politics had filtered down to their community, and suddenly everyone was using the same dehumanizing terms about their neighbors. What neuroscientists find most alarming is how quickly this empathy shutdown spreads from political targets to everyday interactions. Political dehumanization doesn't stay contained in politics. It infects everything from workplace relationships to family dynamics. Most disturbing is how this empathy collapses over time. Each exposure to dehumanizing language makes the next exposure more effective. It's a downward spiral where each cycle leaves us less capable of recognizing our shared humanity, creating fertile ground for conflict that extends far beyond politics. Breaking the language trap. What if I told you there are proven strategies to protect yourself from the divisive effects of political language? Linguistic researchers have identified 3 critical intervention points that can break the cycle of polarization. The first defense is identity anchoring, consciously reinforcing multiple personal identities beyond political affiliation. When you actively remind yourself that you're not just a Democrat or Republican, but also a parent, professional community member, and person of faith, you become significantly more resistant to divisive messaging. The second strategy is practicing language reframing, deliberately translating inflammatory political language into more neutral terms before processing it. When you hear a politician describe opponents with dehumanizing language, pause and mentally substitute neutral descriptive terms before evaluating the message. This cognitive intervention prevents the automatic amygdala response and keeps your rational brain engaged. The most powerful technique is perspective rotation, systematically considering how the same statement would sound if directed at a group you identify with. This mental exercise activates mirror neurons that rebuild empathetic pathways, essentially inoculating you against divisive rhetoric. I started applying these techniques to political news, and within weeks, I noticed I was having more productive conversations with people across the political spectrum, explains a communication professor who studied the effects. I wasn't less passionate about my beliefs, but I was more capable of seeing others as complex human beings rather than caricatures. These approaches work because they target the neurological vulnerabilities that political language exploits. By creating conscious intervention points between hearing divisive language and your brain's automatic response, you maintain your capacity for empathy and rational thought despite increasingly inflammatory rhetoric. What political analysis often misses is that language degradation has preceded every major societal conflict throughout history. Examining documents before the Civil War, researchers identified a clear pattern. Dehumanizing language increased by 217% in the 5 years before violence erupted. This same linguistic pattern appeared before ethnic conflicts in Rwanda, Bosnia, and numerous other civil breakdowns. Digital communication has accelerated this danger by allowing divisive language to spread instantly to millions of people without the moderating effect of face-to-face interaction. Algorithmic reinforcement then amplifies the most extreme voices, creating perception bubbles where increasingly radical language seems normal and reasonable. The most alarming historical pattern is how quickly society can move from divisive language to physical conflict. The transition doesn't happen gradually. It reaches a tipping point where years of linguistic division suddenly manifest as action. Recognizing these verbal warning signs isn't just about improving discourse. It's about preventing the historical pattern from repeating itself. The uncomfortable truth about political language in America today is that it's not just reflecting division, it's creating it. When political figures transform fellow citizens into enemies through their words, they're not just describing reality, they're manufacturing it. By recognizing how political language manipulates our neurological vulnerabilities and implementing protective cognitive strategies, you can maintain your capacity for empathy and rational thought in an increasingly divided landscape. The future of American democracy may well depend on enough citizens developing this psychological resilience against language designed to divide us. If you found this analysis valuable for navigating today's political landscape, hit that like button and subscribe for more evidence-based insights on preserving our civic health in challenging times. Share your own experiences with political division in the comments below. Together, we can build a community committed to healing our national conversation.